It's back, the Reckless Renewables Rally. Make a statement where it truly counts, this time in Canberra. Join us on the Parliament House lawn at 10 a.m. on Tuesday, February 6th, the first session of Parliament for 2024. People from across the country, coastal and regional areas are rallying for the government to stop the reckless rollout of environmentally harmful, unreliable and costly so-called renewable projects. These include wind, solar and high voltage transmission line projects. Listen to speakers representing the federal and state governments, community organisations and environmentalists, all accompanied by great music and entertainment. Bring your flags, banners, signs and most importantly, your voice and ears to support rural and regional Australia. Together, let's ensure that the Minister for Climate Change and Energy, Chris Bowen, and the Australian Government take responsibility and stop the risks and costs associated with their reckless and obsessive rush to adopt these so-called renewable energy projects. What's on the line is Australia's national interests, our economy, our security and the well-being of our environment both now and into the future. Join us in Canberra. Together we can make a difference. Not clean, not green, not net zero.
No one has ever shown that human emissions of carbon dioxide drive global warming.
We have a massive power, and it's the power to say no.
They put all these words on these flyers and it means nothing. It's garbage.
We're all going to die!
Doctors are gaslighting patients.
If you keep silent, then this is what's going to happen. And they'll make us silent.
I would rather paper cut my eyelids than have anything to do with this.
I love that saying.
We are one people, one flag, one Australia.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the XCandidates. My name is Stephen Tript, joined again by Adam Zara. How are you going today, Adam?
Oh, pretty good, Stephen. Thanks, mate. How are you going?
Yeah, not too bad. Now, last week we had Jason Strecker on talking about education, and straight after the interview when we logged off, you said to me that was a really good interview. How did you find that one?
Yeah, that was really good. I had a couple of people ring me up actually about that one because I do have, a few people around me that are teachers and things like that. And to be honest with you, if the teacher is, I'll even say moderate, like a moderate or to the right side of politics, even just that little bit, they just know that the system's just not right. Like it's just, we're not doing right by our children and it's just going to be, a bad thing. I've got one fella, he's working on a project about, trying to address some of the curriculum and seeing how he can work it into his curriculum during the school, because the teachers, they set up their own curriculums as well. And we know that through what we've been doing over the past few years is that they use the well-being phrase or part of the curriculum to put whatever they want into it. So, whether if you have a lefty teacher or something like that, they can turn around and, teach about, transgenderism and, all that LGBT community stuff and all that kind of stuff. And it's all inside the well-being part of the curricula where the teacher kind of sets it. So I guess there's some really good teachers out there and some really good people out there, and they're working really hard to try and combat the left just with common sense. It's, you'd almost be able to turn the well-being thing into, multiplication. And as I suspected after the lockdown last time, and funnily enough, my kids actually went back to school, not at a deficit. They actually went back to school better and actually fixed up their grades. They actually had better report cards at the end of last year than a couple of them previous. And that was basically just through times tables. And it just fixed kind of everything. So, it was really interesting, and his points were really interesting, and I think they were very valid. So it was a very interesting interview for me as well. So it was good.
Yeah, so if you want to check that one out, head to our Rumble page. You can find all our interviews on Rumble. And of course, we are coming to you live now on Facebook, YouTube, and Rumble. If you want to comment, you can comment live. Tony's added already. So yeah, add to a conversation in the chat. You can also call in live. I'll put the link in the chat at some stage throughout the interview if you want to call in and ask our special guest a question. But also, if you want to support us, you can head to Buy Me a Coffee now. we started this just as a thing to do, but we've got a lot of support from people through Buy Me a Coffee. So if you do choose to support us in any way that you choose, or any amount that you choose, feel free to jump on to Buy Me a Coffee, just /XCandidates, and you'll find us there. And we'll be very appreciative if you do decide to go down that route. I know Adam and I always get very excited when that happens. So thank you for everyone that's donated in the past. We really appreciate it. But on tonight's show, this one's going to be something that we haven't done before, a little bit unique. We haven't gone down this path. We've had lieutenant colonels on in the past, like Alastair Pope and Kevin Lockery, but we haven't had someone that's worked for the UN as a peacekeeper. So he's had a lot of experience in different parts of the world, some very dicey parts of the world, and I've been told he's got a very interesting story to share. He's also worked in the mining sector as well in Australia and overseas. So Shane Caudwell, welcome to the XCandidates, mate. Good to have you.
Good evening. Good to be here. Thanks very much for the invite, Stephen Adams. Really, really good to see you.
So you started off in the Australian military. What motivated you to join in the first place? Like, what motivates someone to join the military?
I joined at 15. In those days, the Australian military had an apprenticeship program, which is now gone, now defunct. My father, my grandfather were all military. I very specifically wanted a technical trade. I grew up enjoying fixing push bikes, motorbikes, anything mechanical, I think, much to my father's disgust at the stage. I joined cadets as soon as I was old enough, and I wanted to be in the military as soon as I was old enough. The bonus for me is that there was just nothing that I ever wanted to do as a child other than join the military. And then once I realised I really enjoyed anything mechanical, the double bonus of an apprenticeship and a career. So at 15 and a half, I packed up and headed to Wagga in New South Wales to become an aircraft fitter, or an aircraft engine fitter, as it turned out. So that was how I got there. I don't have any recollection as a kid of wanting to do anything else.
Wow, that's really, really good. So being involved in the military since such a young age, and you're in a better position, I guess, to talk about the current state of the Australian military, and how does that make you feel, and what it wants? Well, what it wants, I from speaking to other people, we know that it's gone probably downhill. So compared to what it once was to what it is now, how does that make you feel?
Last January, I just had a 40th reunion of the intake that I joined with in 1983, and some of those guys I joined with were all apprentices. We basically, whatever you think the lowest rank on the totem pole in the military is, the apprentices are below that pretty much. You're 15, 16, you're a kid, although at the time you think you're as hard as nails.
Yeah.
It's definitely changed. It's changed a lot. And I hate to say it was better in my day, because it probably wasn't. It was different. It was different circumstances, different times, lots of different things, lots of different parameters, I think. You hear stories, you hear things are easier, things are different, things are better, but I see the rate of guys discharging. I see some of the mental health issues, or I hear it talked about. I speak to mates, and I kind of think there was a big push, especially after the Hoddle Street massacre. Martin Bryant screamed bastardism and bastardisation in the military as one of the contributing factors to his rampage. And they came through and they talked to us, and were you bastardised, yada, without really defining it. I think it had to be a bit hard and a bit tough and a bit brutal in a way. They were preparing you to do a job that just doesn't exist anywhere else. To take some of that brutality away and what you might call bastardisation, I think, is a mistake. It's as rough as you think training can be. It's a safe place. You're not going to die in general. You're not going to get hurt. You're not going to get beaten to death. You're not going to get all those sorts of things. It's a place in which you work out you can do this job, you can't do this job. I think it's changed, and maybe not for the better. I think a little bit of the brutality and the roughness, and a little less of the I don't know, what do you call it, wokeness? Yeah, whatever you call the new parameters of, we've got to be a little bit more gentle and a little bit more inclusive and a little bit more everything. I'm sorry, your primary job in the military is to take that rifle and deal with the issue in front of you with that rifle. You especially in the army, you're a soldier first, you're a tradesman second, and that was made very clear to us when we were in the army. I feel a bit sorry is probably the word to be reasonable to use for the guys that don't get that backup and support and understanding. I think that they could revisit some of that training, make it that little bit harder, make it that little bit tougher, make it a little bit more of an understanding of what you might face if you go into those situations. The guys I was talking to, some of them have been in 40 years, and they're all saying they're just so glad to be out. They tell stories of, you might have heard of Kapuka basic training, and everybody's got a hilarious story and a tough story to tell. And apparently now that they can, if they're being shouted at or yelled at, they're allowed to take a step to one side so they can discuss with the staff sergeant why they feel they don't deserve to be yelled at or whatever. I'm just thinking that's, there were many times when I was overseas when all you want to do is just give up and lie down and go to sleep and, suck your thumb and pull a blankie up over your head. You haven't got that option. You have to keep doing whatever it is that's required to deal with that situation and continue on. I don't know if they ever push them to that point. I'm hoping they do, but
just a quick follow-up with that. So, in your opinion, from the last conflict you faced to the first conflict you faced, did you find that the battlefield got easier and softer?
No, not at all. Things got more complex. You think in the early 90s in Bosnia, lots of technology. I didn't have to face any sort of massive drone threat. Our technology and what we had available to us to do our job in night vision, thermal imaging, in all the technologies that could support our endeavours. You look at them now, and I mean, what we thought was absolutely brilliant satellite imagery and AWACS and assistance and all that now would Google Earth is better, and then as things progressed, the threats became more advanced, more technical, more difficult to deal with. Once drones became a thing as a contractor, I'd be doing my job. My job was mostly all technical. So for everybody knows about the Special Air Service Regiment, the SEALs, the British SAS, the Tier 1 groups. There are bunches and bunches of people, both contractor and regular military, that put them in a position to do their jobs, from refueling the aircraft and the vehicles and to building the refueling installations, to providing some of the logistical support, which is what we did, to allow those guys to do their job. As it used to be in Bosnia and some of those early places, we didn't have much in the way of air threat. We could be mortared, we could be shelled, we could be attacked depending on where we were. That's all changed now. Every third world despot's got access to satellite imagery and drones and all these other technologies that make life miserable. It's I think it's only going to get more and more complex. Look at what's happening in the Middle East now. The drone threat coming from Yemen. I'm not sure how their countermeasures are going to work across the sphere, across everything they've got to do on that job.
We've got a comment here from Graham in the chat, and hello, Graham. Good to see that you're listening. He says the softening up of our ADF is by design. Soft personnel are not willing to question anything. So I guess my question following that comment is, for a good soldier to develop a good soldier, do they need to be? Does it take a certain type of breeding before they get to the army, or is it the breeding that they get within the army, or is it a bit of both?
I think it's probably not so much breeding, it's an understanding of what you're going to get into before you start, and acknowledge what Graham says. It's by design. There's a level in the military now. One of the generals in particular declared his transsexual aide-de-camp as the bravest person he'd met. And I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, somewhere in Iraq right now, there's an engineer with a mind lab detector trying not to stand on an IED. You know, to me, I'm not for or against. I don't care. You want to be trans, go live your best life, you know. And if me waving hello, goodbye helps you do that, good luck to you. You know, but that guy walking up the road in Iraq with a detector, trying not to turn into pink mist, I think that's just an embarrassment that a general would start down that path. And that seems to be the way that they're moving now. And, you know, people talk about the mental health issues and all that. If you've got the support and understanding what you need to do your job. I recently flew to Adelaide and met up with the guy who was my drill instructor, my corporal at basic training, and he ended up doing 40 years getting out as a warrant officer. I had a huge amount of respect for that guy when I was in, and I was a gobby little 15-year-old. You know, you join up thinking you're hard. What you actually are is you're boy hard. You're not man hard at all. And catching up with him again after 40 years, and he remembered everything, and it was just one of the best nights I've had in forever. He remembered names, times, telling jokes, and all the rest of it. And one of the comments was, he said, "Oh, we were sure you were going to make it. You know, we understood that you get there if you could keep your trap shut." And it was funny. I said, "Well, you know, after 40 years, nothing's changed. That trap still flaps around a bit much at times still." And I think my current boss would probably agree with him. But he was a hard man in his own right, and had to be and needed to be, and it was good. And it was a really good example. We were 16, 17, all the energy in the world. You think you're a tough little bugger. And he focused that energy, focused that attention, taught us skills that has stayed there for the whole life. You know, team, working in teams, the group dynamic. The way they do it is you hear about going through basic training, and probably the best description is they take your head apart and put it back together the way they want. But what they're doing is showing you that as an individual, you'll rarely overcome all the trials they'll put in front of you. As a group, you can overcome every single one of them. And it's to make sure that group dynamic functions, make sure you support that team. Without your support and their support of you, you're just not going to make it. It's, as I said, I don't think it's breeding so much. It's an understanding. I think the military went backwards when they started with the I'm not sure what they want out of what is effectively a fighting force. You know, as I said, I don't care about transgenderism. I have good friends who are homosexual. It's none of my business. I don't tell people about my sex life. I don't want to know about theirs. It doesn't mean they're not decent people. But to start breaking down something like the military, a structure like the military, by allowing people a little bit more say or a little bit of an easier run, it's wrong, and you're pulling all that apart. You know, you read studies now of young men that aren't willing to join the military, aren't willing to fight. I can understand that, because I'm not a fan of Australia, and at the moment I wouldn't fight to protect a system that I can't respect at all. You know, but I think pulling the military apart and making it easier or more inclusive, whatever term you want, is wrong. It's a mistake. But I can't see him coming back from it anytime soon.
Yeah, that's very interesting there, Graham, because I was just going to say, like, you know, you brought up, there's a couple of things. You brought up mental health, and I have a question on that. But what I want to ask as well is, with obviously the drones and technology, you would imagine that war, just like football's gotten quite fast paced now. So, like, you know, as war has evolved, and you've got machinery and machines and computers obviously contributing to the fighting force, like, you know, like you said, like before, you know, you had mortars and you had gunfire and things like that, which you would expect as a soldier. But now you've got like these drones that can fly in and they zip in and zip out. I'm quite sorry, Shane, I must have called you Graham. Sorry about that. Sorry. It must have, that was interesting. So softening your soldiers, I think definitely is backwards, because you'd imagine that you would have to train them harder. So I've had military people say that they break you down and rebuild you as they want, like you just said. So that's, a common thread that I've heard from other ADF. But yeah, like, do you think that, obviously softening soldiers or giving them, I don't think you can perform a task like something like militarily when you have other people opening their mouth. You basically, orders get handed down. You're, I don't know. I'm not military. So the boss or the sergeant general, whatever, he turns around and says, "This is what we have to do. This is what we need to do to succeed." And it's basically yes, sir, and go, and just do what you've been trained to do.
To an extent, yeah. So there's also, hopefully leading up to that, there's quite a bit of preparation and quite a bit of input is sought from the team. So if you've got an experienced group of guys, and in my case, it was all technical support. So we have to go here, we have to build this facility, or this facility's in place, but it's damaged, or yada, yada, yada. Look, Shane, how do you think we're best placed to do that? Are you okay to deal with the damage we know about? All those sorts of things. But when it happens, yeah, it has to be very, very much, this is what we're going to do, this is how we're going to do it. You need an end goal. You need an understanding of what your end goal is, because if something goes wrong and that person can't turn around and tell me what he needs next, I need to know what my goal is to achieve. There'll be times when I have to be autonomous and I can't get instruction. If I understand what the end result is, I've got a pretty good chance of making reasonable decisions along the way to still achieve that same result. You don't want an autonomous drone, for want of a better word, a person who can't function, can't understand, without somebody standing on his shoulder telling him what to do. We want to achieve this result by this time on this date in this way, whatever that result is, whether it's technical security or something else. Hopefully our plan is we as a group of 10 will achieve this. If something happens and there's only 9 or 8 or 6, can we still achieve a portion of it? Is it worth withdrawing? You need to understand what that is, and I'm not sure at times that they put that trust into people. You don't want a zombie. You want a thinking person, and I don't think they've got that mix right. I think it's a bit messy at the moment, and I'm not sure. I think the only way is to take a couple of steps backwards. It's very confronting when you see a dead body, a dead body who's died in horrific circumstances, has been shelled, mortared, shot, whatever. You need to be able to function as you progress through that to deal with the situation at the time. I remember an attack in Sarajevo, and we were in a place called Grass, which was a trolley bus depot, and a rocket landed next to us. So we're trying to get people out through the front gate. We're trying to, in vehicles or whatever. We've come around, we've picked up an elderly lady who had shrapnel wounds. We put her in the ute to take her to town. On the side of the road, at the point of impact, there's a body, and it was very, very messy. I've gone over, and okay, there's nothing I can do for this person right now. Not a thing. I still have to function. I've got an elderly woman with, fairly severe injuries. I've got guys that I'm working with. I need to move. I would like to be able to, respect to this guy's family. I'd like to be able to do something, but I can't. I'm busy right now. But you still have to keep everything functioning, understanding, and the whole time, what if there's another one? Which way do I drive? What's the quickest way to get her to medical treatment? I think when you take that step, you take it back, and you don't make it as tough when you're training. Those decisions might be harder at the time, and if they're harder at the time, is somebody going to lose their life, or is, all decisions going to be made or somebody unable to function? Not saying I'm any sort of Jedi. I was a 15-year-old kid that grew up in Perth when I joined, but I think the military did a lot to prepare me for situations like that, and I'm very thankful for it.
And you've got a bit of a unique story. You mentioned a lot of your friends in the military have been in there for 40 years, and a lot of them, I'm sure, have just been in either the Air Force or the Army or the Navy. You were in the Air Force and the Army, but then you went to the UN. So how did you end up in the UN?
Kind of a weird story. In the Army, I got So I did my trade in the Air Force as an engine airframe fitter, and I went to a unit that had Iroquois helicopters and Caribou, the twin-engine transport, and I worked there. So we had 4 Iroquois and 4 Caribous. I had a personal preference for helicopters for rotary wing, and I, worked on both. I was then posted to a unit in the Air Force that I really didn't like. It was an aircraft depot, and components of an aircraft came in, and I would fix the component. It was just this. I equated to the guy at the factory to make sure the Coke labels are on the right way up. It was after working on helicopters and flying and, New Guinea, Queensland, all over Australia, whatever we were doing, it was pretty soul destroying. The Army at that stage, it had been decided that the Blackhawks, the new S-70As, would go to the Army. And the Army at the time didn't have enough rotary wing trained fitters. So there was a bit of a call went out through the Air Force. Did anybody who was a flight fitter or an engine airframe on Iroquois want to have a look at a career in the Army? That was it as far as I was concerned. I'd, run naked through prickle bushes. So I just first said, yep, I want to be in the Army. I want to get out of here. I want to move. And the Army accepted me, and I then did a service transfer. So I walked in with an MP either side of me. I don't know if they thought I might run or what, but signed my discharge certificate from the discharge papers from the Air Force, and then they slid another set and signed my my enlistment into the Army. So I was a civilian for probably 90 seconds or something like that, and joined the Army. Went through that, and I got a bit involved in the refueling in the Army, as in the quality of the fuel and the mechanism of delivery and how we would run some of these systems for military aircraft. I discharged from the Army in the early 90s for a number of reasons. I'd been in since I was 15. At that stage I'd had enough. And the option was you either stayed and went through the ranks, okay, or you got out. And at that stage I just thought I'd literally from the age of 15 been in the military, being told what to do, how to do it. You have a limited control over your life. So if they want to post you, you'll get posted. If they want to move you within units, they'll move you with the units. And I was sort of starting to get to the point where I wanted to do things. I'd achieved what I thought was a good thing, and I was looking down the barrel of moving to other places. So I just decided, look, time to get out, go and look at other things. I bought a one-way ticket to Hong Kong with my now ex, my wife at the time. And we travelled overland sort of for quite some time, ended up in London, and was enjoying it. I grew a beard down to my belly button and hair down to my bum. I looked like a gynecologist for a grizzly bear by the time I got there. And there was some job advertised in the early, or 1992 in particular. International law had changed, and the system of military contracting was starting to be legit. It wasn't, you weren't a mercenary anymore. You were a military contractor. You could be insured by Lloyd's of London. You could be employed by a company. You paid your taxes, even though those taxes might come from Jersey through the Isle of Man and not pay any tax. So I was walking down the street and in London with, as I said, hair everywhere, and a officer that I'd been in the Army with in Australia was walking in the other direction. And as a bit of a joke, I shoulder charged him, and he thought he was being mugged. So we almost ended up in a fist fight on the street of London till he realised who I was. And we had a bit of a chat, and I had no idea that all this was taking place. And he sort of said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm in London, I've been doing a bit of work here and a bit of work there." I'd luckily enough scored a job, and I was doing some of the testing for the European emission standards and fuel injection. And I absolutely lied through my teeth to get that job, but it was going well. And he gave me a card, and he said, "I'll catch up in the morning." And I thought he wanted to have a coffee. And I said, "Yeah, going for a brew." He goes, "No, you just joined the UN, you dickhead. I'll see you in the morning." And so, yeah, that was how I got recruited. So went in the morning into his office and signed a heap of paperwork and had to fly across to New York and a few other things. And then, a few weeks later, landed in Zagreb in 1992. Went to talk to the guy who was running the system at the time, what was called the POL group, Petroleum Oils and Lubricants. I got given the rank of C4, which was captain, and no one was more surprised than I was when they all of a sudden made me a captain. And walked in there, had a conversation, had a discussion on my history, what I'd done, what I'd worked, what I was comfortable with, and slid a piece of paper across the table and said, "You're going to Sarajevo." And Sarajevo at the time was in the news all through Europe. It was a city under siege. It was, 1,000 shells a day. And you sort of sit there questioning the wisdom of your decision at that time. But all right, let's do it. Let's go to Sarajevo, and that's how it started.
Wow. So has the United Nations changed like over the years? Because when I was a kid, like through the 90s and maybe the early 2000s, a young person, I always thought, that they're the good of the world, and they're doing the right thing by everyone, and they're trying to make, they're trying to do good in the world, right? So they're like the heroes, yeah. And then as I've gotten older, you start to believe, think, it's a globalist kind of like organization. It's not really, it's like independent. It's not really run by, I know that other countries and stuff have signed up to them, but at the end of the day, it's not elected officials that run the show. Where do your orders come from when you're in the UN?
When the UN decides to commit to a mission like they did, and I'll say straight up, I have almost no respect whatsoever for the UN as an organisation. After seeing it function, the last thing you would ever want coming to your country is the United Nations, ever. I would rather see the ground turn to glass than the blue lights turn up, and me having been one of them for many years. The UN, like any organisation, is made up of some very, very good and some very, very bad people and everything in between. Overarching that, the UN has a really good publicist or group of publicists that will go around the world and tell you how altruistic and wonderful they are, and how they save puppies from burning buildings and all the rest of it. That's true to an extent. I'm going to say the guys I work with were amazing people who are still good friends of mine, who you go to some of those UN missions and you're the big dog on the porch. Basically, even what remains of the local government and the militias you're over the top of them. They don't want to take that fight on. We have enough support, enough equipment, enough air power, backup, whatever you need to enforce your will to an extent in some places. So if you get a bunch of UN workers, and some countries and some members are renowned for it, they become the sheriff, and they're the bad sheriff in town. And that's when you hear of molestation of children, rape of women, theft, all those sorts of things. That's pretty common with some UN groups. So you got to think the UN, when it decides to commit to somewhere like Bosnia, they turn around and say, okay, we're going to go to Bosnia. The commitment was long before I joined. They'll turn around to all the member nations and say, okay, we're going to commit to this job in Bosnia for a bunch of reasons. We believe the mission to Bosnia needs this skill set, these people, this equipment, lay out a bit of a list. Member nations will then turn around to the UN, and the Brits at the time said, okay, well, the Gurkhas, we'll send the Gurkhas over. And the French turned around and said, all right, we'll send the Foreign Legion. And the UN said, well, no, thank you. They're considered mercenary soldiers. They don't fight under the flags of their country. And that was the change in law, as far as I understand it, that opened up the world to military contractors again, is there was a change in international law where people weren't considered mercenaries, the Gurkhas and the French Foreign Legion to start with, and that opened the gates for the companies that I worked for to start putting people into UN and other missions. I mean, some of the jobs I did weren't UN, they were NGOs. They were in support of some non-government organisation trying to provide aid or do a job or whatever. But back to the UN, it very much depended on who they were, where they were from. You had some very, very poor quality soldiers. You had soldiers that came from a national background that put them in a position where there were, white Caucasian women were a prize, and all of a sudden they could have that prize. we had to sometimes go and clean up the mess after all of that. We had to turn up, find the place. Everybody distrusted you once we turned up with all our gear on. A lot of times we didn't wear uniform. So what we would do was, in Bosnia, again in particular, as it's a European example you could get, there was a green M65 American military jacket they all called the Vietnam jacket, and it was a prize piece of kit among the Bosnian locals. So we just went out and we bought 30 of them. So we wore those. We wore blue jeans. We wore T-shirts. We had beards. We wore hats. Probably the only thing at times that you could tell we were different from a local just by looking at us were our boots were a lot better. You know, if we had to hit the mountains and get out of there, we needed really good quality mountain boots. So we wore scarpas and things at the time. The equipment we carried was set up a lot better, set up a bit differently, but from a distance, we just looked like locals. You know, you had some of the countries, particularly some of the countries from, what's your podcast like? Do I mention names of countries?
Yeah.
Okay, the Indians were terrible. The Bangladeshis were terrible. The Egyptians were double terrible. Okay, countries like that would turn up, and there was one particular incident we had to go deal with where a UN convoy was delivering food aid, and they'd forced the women and children to provide oral sex to the soldiers on that convoy before they deliver food aid. We had no idea this had taken place. We turn up in this village, and quite rightly, every person in there is gunning for us. So we could hang on, stop. What's going on here? You literally get to the point we have to state, look, we're Australians, we're Brits, we're Western military, we're good guys. We'll help you. That takes a lot. You never quite get all that back, but you get to the point. Okay, they trust us, specifically just us. But then you've got to turn.
Sorry to cut you off, Shane. Just to, I guess, clarify, you were saying that you were working for a non-government organization. Were all the UN personnel under that arrangement, or were certain countries supplying their own troops, or was it you were specifically working for?
It varied hugely. So you had the troops that came from member nations. So there was an Australian soldier on exchange with the British battalion in Sarajevo when I was there. He was regular military. There was a British battalion. There were 3 French battalions. There was Ukrainians. There was Norwegians, Danes. All those groups, they were regular military. They'd come from the country. They were in uniform. They had weapons, tanks, equipment, bombs, whatever they bought. Then you had our group was specifically engineers of all sorts, and you pretty much had to be ex-military. It was very rare to find somebody that wasn't ex-military, and those guys normally brought a very specialised skill in some way that they couldn't find in an ex-military guy. So we worked as effectively as engineers, so the same as the military might work as an engineer, with the same rank structure, with the same equipment, with the same vehicles, with the same everything, but we were civilians, ex-military civilians doing that job, so it varied a lot. And then you'd have NGOs that we worked for contracting companies, so I effectively worked for a company that you can imagine is almost like skilled engineering, but provides military contractors. NGOs might turn up and, they varied hugely as to what they did and who they were, and they varied hugely from being very good, decent, reasonable people to some of the dumbest people I've ever met in my entire life, and everything in between. You get one particular incident, we had some NGO from Middle America. They turn around and their church sponsors them with the UN and says, righto, Jim, Bob and Mary Ellen, off you go to Bosnia to save the world, spread the word of God. We've got you registered as an NGO with the UN. You'll get support when you get there, yada, yada, yada. So some frumpy middle-aged housewife and her brow-beaten husband turn up in a place to assist. It might be to teach children. They'll come up with their own little plan. But in this particular instance, we had to go to recover a vehicle that had been hit in an ambush, and there were 2 dead locals in it. The ambush had through the windscreen, so I had 2 local guys. We've got to drag the whole lot back into town. We've got to work out what's going on. We've got to go through the whole process. And we get back there and Mary Ellen's in tears and Jim Bob's wringing his hands and they're all having a little pray to God. And the two guys in there are dead, so we got to, can we find the family? Somebody's got to go tell them Dad's dead. So whatever they had coming at midnight, whatever food, anything is now gone. And I opened the back of the truck, and it was all full of like green wood, like it was pine trees. And I thought, well, what do you bring that snake? Well, they're not going to be able to burn that. And she turns around and says, oh, no, they're Christmas trees. They're, it's coming up Christmas time. And I went, well, it's a Muslim city. You just killed two guys for a truckload of green wood. There is nothing in there that's any good to anybody. In good times, those Muslim people would celebrate Christmas with their neighbours, but you just killed two guys to push your agenda. We've now got to go find the families of those two guys, explain Dad's dead, see what we can do to get them more aid, see what we can do to assist them. It's really limited. What are you going to do as Mary Ellen has a breakdown and Jim Bob books his tickets to fly back home again, and the attitude of people, that was common, and I saw that in Cambodia, I saw that in lots of places. The NGO system really is broken, that wasn't good. We were...
Sorry, Shane. These NGOs, I suppose they're getting paid for all this work, and so are the contractors as well. So is that right?
Contractors, yeah. We were paid, and in those days we were paid very well.
There's almost a sense that some of these groups, not all of them, as you said, there's some good ones and there's some bad ones, but some of them wouldn't mind seeing these conflicts prolonged because it's a gravy train for them. Would that be correct?
There's in some of the countries, you find the flashest hotel in the safest zone and go and and count the Land Cruisers and Mercedes G-Wagons and whatever. So, again, I reference the church, but it might not be the church. It'll be a group. They fly over there. They come up with an idea. Our NGO will deliver X, whatever their NGO is going to do. They'll get a brand new Land Cruiser. They'll get a stipend. They'll get their hotel paid for. They'll hire a private chef. They'll have all this sort of stuff. They might drive out of the city limits once, decide it's way too rough out there, drop off 5 plastic buckets to the locals so they can dig water out of a ditch, go back into town, do their little email back to their church in Minnesota and go, well, look what a great job we've done. And that was really common, and it was very, very much an us and them. Once we worked out that was the sort of NGO, it's like, I'm actually actively going to try and mess you about just because I dislike you so much. By the same token, there were NGOs there that did a really good job and really, really tried to help and really put themselves on the line. And part of if you ever want to have look up a group called the Serious Road Trip in Bosnia. To this day, I would give those guys the shirt off my back. That was a bunch of guys. They were sitting in England. They bought a whole bunch of ex-military trucks. They painted them up with Roadrunner and all these cartoon characters, so there was no doubt about who they were. And they took food aid and assistance to anybody that needed it across confrontation lines. To me, those guys need wheelbarrows to carry their balls around it. They were over Mount Igman. They were doing everything, and you can find them on the internet today. References to the Serious Road Trip. They were the group that actually bought the band in when the concert was in Sarajevo. So there were good ones, but they varied a lot, And like anything, if you take away some of the rules we have, the good people will have a moral compunction to maintain reason and rule and law and all the rest of it. The bad people all of a sudden don't have the restrictions that society and morality pushes on them, and they become worse, And I say I'm lucky, but I think it was well planned by my bosses that I worked with guys that had wives and kids and a strong moral compass and wanted to do the right thing, And those guys are still my mates today. It's great.
So it's really interesting the way that you've kind of described the UN. I don't know if I've got it right or wrong, but so is the UN like basically it's a contract fighting force, and is it employed by a particular country or particular group for interests other than protecting people?
The UN's an octopus. The portion I dealt with was called UNPROFOR, and that was the UN protection forces of the former Yugoslav Republic, whatever it was. So that was just one arm of the UN. As you know, there's the World Health Organization. There's all these other groups. It's become this multi-level bloody deep sea octopus with a finger and everything. I only saw one little part of it, and I saw how broken that was. But, you know, at the time you go into UN headquarters and it's just, you know, if I sort of in my head pictured Dr. Evil up there somewhere with all his henchmen running around. That kind of what it felt like, you know.
It sounds like Spectre.
Yeah,
from
yeah.
James Bond.
I had to, you know, I went in once and had a bit of a meeting, and it was a discussion on the radicalisation of Islamic youth in Sarajevo at the time, and what it basically was the Bosnian Muslim people considered themselves European. They were university educated. They were multilingual Europeans. They might well be Muslim, but they're Muslim in the same way we were considered Christian in a lot of ways. They had a tradition, you know, they get married in church, or they get married in mosque, we get married in church maybe. They would celebrate Ramadan, all those sorts of things. But a lot of the women wore miniskirts and, you know, tops, and they drank alcohol, and they were European before they were anything else. And it got to the point where they, you know, probably around, it was well and truly underway by 93, 94. They couldn't understand why we're Europeans, we're part of Europe. Why is Europe not helping us with this? And at the time, it was, I think, a political move. They were Muslim, and that was the start of the point to say, well, you know, you're on your own, you're Muslim. And then the assistance came through Saudi Arabia, the Gulf states, through Islam. You know, you tell a guy who grew up the same way I did, ride this push bike and playing soccer and, you know, all those sorts of things, that you may well die a very horrible death in the very near future. Either the mind switches off, you become a machine, you know, but one of the ways they deal with it is they turn to religion. They turn to, this is what my grandmother and grandfather made it through World War II by being good Muslims. They turned to Islam and everything that meant, and the West, the UN, kind of couldn't understand it. And we're sitting there thinking, well, what did you think was going to happen? You know, I barely made it through year 10, and I can fix engines really good, and I got that bit, you know. And, you know, why did you think that this would be different? So you had the Saudis, the Wahhabis came in and sort of started a system where if they went to mosque regularly, if their wives wore burqa, then they would get a stipend, effectively the dole. There was no money, there was no food. It was aid to them. You know, we're surviving. We've got money. I can pay rent. My wife doesn't have to prostitute herself to a UN soldier to get food for the kids. You know, and that's the level that it fell apart to. Yeah, the UN is an organisation, as I said, they're the last people you want to see. You know, you don't want them involved.
Let's focus on Sarajevo, because it's really important. And I didn't even know the whole story of Sarajevo. So between 1992 and 1996, they were under siege. It was a total of 1,425 days, which was far longer than the Battle of Stalingrad, which obviously was one of the most horrific battles of all time during World War II. But Sarajevo was longer, and you were there. You were part of it. And there was this documentary made in the recent years called "Scream for Me, Sarajevo," where Bruce Dickinson from Iron Maiden and his solo band at the time, Skunkworks, was smuggled into Sarajevo to perform a concert, and you were part of that, correct?
Yeah. So the movie's still floating around. We actually went across for the premiere, and it was.
Well, what I might do is I might play the trailer for everyone. It's about a 2-minute trailer, but I think it's worth it because it really gives a really good context of this issue. So for everyone watching, I'll play the trailer now so everyone knows what we're talking about.
It was pretty jaw-dropping, the scale of the war and the inability of the UN to do anything about it.
We've just done a load of touring. We've done America, we've done Europe. And so another gig, no big surprise, except, of course, he said it's in Sarajevo. I was like, hang on, there's a war in Sarajevo, wasn't there?
There was this big yellow lorry with Roadrunner painted on it, bright yellow, as in, shoot me, hit me, blow me up, you know.
there's a British soldier there with his Kevlar and helmet. He goes, you see up there, that brown line just below the top of the hill? That's the Serbian front line. They're watching us now like we're watching them. I was like, oh, right, yeah. He goes, but they're watching through sniper sights.
This guy jumps out in the middle of the road and points AK-47 at us.
Right, this is worse than we thought, isn't it?
It was astonishing seeing little kids scurrying like rats from one building to another.
There are people getting massacred. There's genocides going on, and there was nothing I could do.
It left an impression on me that's going to stay with me for my whole life.
This is a concert that nobody ever believed would ever happen.
I went out there and I was just like, how can I ever be as big as their lives need me to be?
Frankly, I thought there was a very significant risk that we'd be shelled.
So it's very harrowing, this whole thing. And you were there, and I've watched some other interviews that the band members had about this, and they really struggled. One of the bass player had post-traumatic stress afterwards, and what they really struggled was coming back to England and coming back to their hometowns and hearing people on the train talk about their daily lives, and they're like, what are you complaining about? Like, do you know what's happening, in another part of Europe?
So, yeah, go on,
a little bit more, just give us a little bit more of what you witnessed there and during this event.
It's a bit embarrassing to say. You get used to it. You get used to it. You understand it. You realise what's happening. You get that the UN doesn't have the will to force a resolution. The UN, when you first start to work for the UN, they had a mission appointee come in and speak to us, and he made the comment, and he said, "Look," he said, "you go on 4 missions," and he said, "2 will be worse than when you got there. There's nothing you can do. It'll get worse and worse and worse. 1 might be okay, might hold the middle ground. That won't be a lot to do with with what you do as a UN contractor. It'll probably be the stage that conflict's at. And 1 might be better. And again, it won't be a great deal to do with you. It'll be that's the stage the conflict's going through. So your odds aren't great. But it's that guy, Chris, I'm having a beer with him tomorrow night. He's in Perth. I couldn't get hold of him today. I was going to see if I could jag him do it. He's supporting a band in Perth, doing a tour through Australia at the moment. The whole thing is you see that on a day-to-day, and you do become hardened to it to an extent. I'm sort of really lucky. Lucky I haven't, I don't wake up with nightmares. I don't have problems. I have in my head, I really, really understand what a really shit day looks like, and to be honest, probably the worst day of my life was lived in that city during the siege. And now I work a very well-paid job that I really enjoy doing with people that I enjoy working with my parents are healthy. Everything for me is on the up and up. I'm making decisions to leave Australia financially comfortable, all the rest of it. So in my head, I use that to say, that's what shit looks like. If I have a bad day at work, I give myself a slap up the ear roll, have another coffee and continue on. It's not as bad as what happened there. But that's literally, they were having days where 1,000 shells a day landed in the Muslim part of town. And there was one part in the middle, was probably, I don't know, if I had to guess, maybe 3 kilometres wide at its thinnest point. So everything was in reach from Serbian shell fire, sniper fire, mortars, all the rest of it. You just understood that you were pretty much, there were portions you were constantly under their umbrella, and if it was time, it was time. I got wounded in 1995 and spent a bit of time in hospital over that, and the rounds came through the vehicle, hit the headrest, my neck and the side of my face, things like that. But it's sort of an occupational hazard. You get used to it, as weird as it sounds, and there's one of the things, there was there was a group there that were very macho. You know, they went the whole warrior brother thing and all the carry on. With the guys I was with, I understood that some days you just want to crawl headfirst down that sleeping bag. If that's what you want to do, do it. But tomorrow morning when we walk back out through that door again, you've got to be switched on. We've got to go again. But there was never any judgment. If there's everybody gets to the point where they just got to go and sit by themselves for a little while and have a think about what they've seen and process it. And there was never any judgment when you needed that time. Mate, everybody gets to shed a tear at some time, you know, and there was never any drama. The boys are looking after you. And all those guys have, you know, some have been through rough patches, but they've all gone on to lead, do amazing things, you know, have amazing lives, have awesome families, have great kids, have all the rest of it. Where another crew that I knew pretty well that were, you know, were all, you know, all about their tattoos and their, you know, how much they could bench press. You know, I think they're down to about 50% of guys that just, you know, couldn't deal, couldn't process, couldn't whatever, and decided to end it for themselves. You know, I don't know whether what we did was the solution, but it seemed to have worked. You know, there's things you think about those days. You sort of, there's a few things, you know, that'll set you off. You put that in your box, you put the lid on the box, and you don't open it. You know, and there's I don't put myself in a situation where I'll get upset. And normally for me, if one of those things comes back to haunt me, it starts with tears and ends with a thermonuclear rage. So I just don't put myself in a position where that might be the end result. And for me, it's all about the kids. You know, what happened to some of the kids there. I can't watch a movie where a kid's hurt. I can't read a book. I don't want to see YouTube TikToks of an injured kid. None of that shit is funny. Nothing is funny. So I just don't go there. I mean, I haven't had a television in 30 years. You know, I read books voraciously on whatever subject I'm on at the time. And one of the things I find great is that I don't put that rubbish into my head that oozes out of the television. I've got nothing but disrespect for that and the people behind it. You know, if I do get involved with any sort of media, it's something like you guys. You know, what you do is awesome. This is fantastic. And I got to say thanks, Tony, for you know, introducing me.
Yeah, well, we've got a little comment here from Tony, speaking of the devil. She probably hate me. She'll probably hate that I called her the devil. Just figuratively speaking. So love your perspective, Shane. The UN is about the perpetuation of war, not the deliverance of peace through resolution. Is this a fair observation? Well, I just got one thing before you answer.
Yeah.
That's how they get paid, by war. So
it is. If there were no conflict, a lot of their reason to exist wouldn't exist. You know, and then you go adding to the fact, I mean, you know, feel free to cut me off at any time if you don't agree. But for me, the decision for me to leave Australia coalesced in COVID. And that was where it just became, there's it and there's no other way for me. When the Australian government turned around and said that with my Australian passport, and I can wear my grandfather's medals, my great-grandfather's medals, my father's medal, and my medal, all that on Anzac Day, I figure I've earned the right to mind my own business and do my own thing. But when you tell me I can't come running for that entry door, if I need to come back to Australia in a hurry and you've shut the door, then what good is Australia and what good is that passport to me? You know, there's all the vested interests in the UN, Australia being one of them. You know, there's a million different things going on in the background. It might look altruistic to go to a country and save the people, but you know, if you notice people with countries with oil and minerals and things, they get far more assistance, justice, and peacekeeping than some poor little African nation that relies on basket weaving and bananas. You know, it's very messy, and you don't see it when you're down there in the weeds. You kind of think I'm doing my best to make these people's lives better if I can. And in a way, that's also a protection mechanism. You can sort of sit there and look yourself in the eye after it's all over. All these years later, did I give it a red hot crack at doing my best? Yeah, I did. You know, I tried my very best. Did I get it all right? No, 100% didn't get it right. Could I have done better? In hindsight, probably, but at the time, maybe not. Things like Scream for Me Sarajevo, you know, that those guys put themselves at a huge risk. Trevor, Chris, all those guys you saw in that movie. I was best man at Trevor's wedding. when he married one of the ladies who worked for the UN. She, awesome lady, huge amount of respect for her, speaks more languages than I've got fingers and toes, you know. They tried their best, they do the right thing, but I think the UN as an organisation has its own vested interest agendas and all that, and none of that is ever going to change. The only thing you can really do is try and divest yourself as best you can of groups like the UN. To read a book, a really good book, and it was talking about Morris Catering. There's a book called Blood Money about Somalia. Sorry, I'm just going to have a drink. I'm getting a bit croaky.
Yeah, go for it. That's okay.
Yeah, where I work is very dusty, and here's the end result. But there's a book on Somalia and Morris Catering, what happened there when his son was killed, called Blood Money. And it's literally one of the best books I've read on the dysfunction of the UN. I mean, there was in Sarajevo again, there was a UN mission appointee that was very clear that if the Bosnian women were to work in his office and there were jobs available and they were well paid and they were protected and they got food, they had to sleep with him. And he made no bones about it. He did, you will, if you want this job, if you want to get paid, if you want to be protected, if you want this, you will sleep with me when I tell you to sleep with me. And it was well known. And I mean, he was well protected in one particular building. He never ventured out on the off chance that somebody might assist him with his stupidity. And that was not uncommon, you know, and you sort of sit there and look at it and you end up in a bit of a seething rage, you know. It's like, mate, if I see you outside, if I can get at you, man, I'll turn you into a meme, you know.
So I believe that, you know, that I believe people like yourself and like even, you know, Iron Maiden and those guys, they're trying to do, I believe you're trying to, in general, as a singularity, as a single person trying to do your best, and you're there for a reason, because as you said, if you weren't there trying to do your best, you wouldn't be able to sleep at night. It'd basically ruin your life, right? But do you think that maybe the UN, it's saving people is just a side effect for them to get entry into a country to pillage it?
I think it varies from mission to mission. There's probably some that are what you would expect from a UN mission. Some portions of Bosnia would be what you would hope to see your representatives doing. But it's just this octopus that, you know, there was an incident we had on another job, you know, in another country in another day. We were tasked with going and retrieving this guy. We didn't understand fully what had happened, but that he was in danger. And we had the ability to remove him from that danger. So it was quite involved. There were aircraft involved. There was a convoy involved. There were a lot of people involved to get this one person out. We got that one person. There's a process to, you know, bring them into the convoy, protect them, get them airlifted, blah, blah, blah. We found out later that person had been running a brothel with children, and the locals had found out about it and gone after him. We at the time had no idea that this is what was happening. All we've got, okay, there's a UN asset, something's gone horribly wrong. We need to get hands on him and get him out of there. We didn't realise until much later. So this person had the ability to demand of the UN that we remove him from the situation he put himself in. And it's only later we find out that that's what he was actually doing. You know, and you all sit there and look at each other when you realise what's gone on, and you know, we just did that. We had no idea. You know, you're never going to see that dude again. But that's not an uncommon story. Things like that. There was in the early days of Sarajevo during the siege, as simple as the local Mercedes dealer, they took all went to the Mercedes dealer, all the spare parts, and a whole bunch of them were the roofs of, you know, the what do you call them, the folding tops, the convertibles.
Yeah, convertibles, yeah.
Yeah, there was an aircraft flew all that out to France. Why? The Sarajevo Museum had a Stradivarius violin, and it had some amazing tapestries. And there was one fairly high up guy in the UN that when he was caught said, I was taking all those tapestries out for safekeeping as it was in his personal gear being moved, things like that. You know, it's really common, and it seems to be the UN will circle the wagons and protect rather than treat them the way they should be treated. They sort of take it as, oh, we've got to protect the name of the UN despite the fact this person's been the ultimate scumbag. To me, it's like, well, you know, wrap him in one of those tapestries and keep whacking with a baseball bat till blood comes. You know, and historically, like everybody that's ever done big, you know, stints with the UN will have similar stories. You know, it's I got to the point now where I want to bury myself so far out in the middle of nowhere, minding my own business, riding motorbikes and fishing and trying to be a good person. You know, even Australia can't do that for me anymore. You know,
sounds like your life.
Well, I hope you'll have to come and visit. We'll do a podcast from.
I'm there, especially as I'll get the bike too. I was going to ask you now. You've mentioned a few times that you're ready to hightail it out of Australia, and you're ready to pack up. You're sick of what we've become and what Australia has become and whatnot. Let's let's bring it back a little bit locally, if you're right with that, Stephen, because we're at the hour mark already, and it's just time's just flown by.
I agree. I just saw that it was past the hour, and this is. I mean, we could talk to you all night because you're so full of stories that we haven't covered before as well. But I guess if Adam, you do want to focus on Australia, well, just this week, Woolworths have come out, and so now Audi as well have come out, and they've said that they're not going to sell Australia Day merchandise.
Australia Day merchandise. They'll sell Halloween stuff, but they won't sell an Australian flag for Australia Day.
So as a military man,
Diwali, but they won't celebrate Australia Day. Yeah.
I guess you've
them
seen
out of the country.
Yeah, you've seen some really dicey places in the world. Some really scary situations in countries. Do you see any similarities forming in Australia that you would be concerned about?
Well, the whole thing is they're pulling. You know, I don't think nationalism's a dirty word, but it seems to be. You know, basically, if you're not left of centre, you're now a far right extremist. You know, define far right. So if you had to define far right as racist, 100% I'm not. As homophobic, 100% I'm not. As, you know, like literally, if I interact with a person, I want them to be a decent, moral, upstanding person, whatever colour, whatever religion, whatever they look like. That, you know, to me, that means I can't be a far right extremist, you know, but anything even remotely right of centre, you know, I can be very left wing on some issues, you know, environmental to an extent. A few others, I can be very right wing, but not to the detriment of anybody else. My life is, I don't want to dictate to anybody how they live and what they do. I just want a decent person next door. I think they're dismantling the structure, the pride, everything that exists in Australia, the patriotism, the nationality. It's just being pulled apart on purpose. You know, to me, I mean, I've been to the Middle East a lot. You know, we work there a lot, and I'm no fan of Israel or any of the surrounding countries. You know, I at one stage I could understand why Palestinians throw rocks at F-16s because I'd had enough of the Israelis for that week. You know, went through the whole process. But how in Australia can we allow a protest? Palestinians at the firing fireworks at the Opera House, all those sorts of things. A couple of years ago, I was sitting in a mining camp in WA, and there were two Croatian guys, a Serbian guy, and myself, and we all fought in the war. All four of us had fought quite extensively, and sometimes in the same battle on opposite sides. And that was sort of pretty funny. We're talking about it. There's no animosity. I got to respect those guys for going through what I went through and all the rest of it. And we're sitting there having a beer. You know, will we go to each other's house and kids' christenings? Probably not. Well, is there a respectful beer and a comment and a g'day and a smile? Yeah, 100%. And I'm sitting there, and a young guy walked over, would have been about 19, and I speak enough Serbo-Croat to understand he had a Serb accent, and his comment was, "Why are you drinking with these dogs?" to the Serbian guy with us. This guy picked him up by the throat almost, you know. You're not there, you weren't there, you don't understand. We were all there, and here we are sitting here having a beer. This is Australia. It's gone, it's over. Whatever happened over there happened over there. We could be neighbours now, and we'll have barbecues at each other's houses. But yet this guy, he's been raised here by parents, brothers, some sort of thought of you know, what manhood looks like, that he needs to take on, you know, that issue and that war. And it seems to me in Australia we're encouraging that for everybody except Australians.
But
you
isn't
know?
that, Shane, isn't that the stupidity of war? Like, you hear stories from World War One, where, you know, at Christmas time the British and the Germans would have a soccer game, and then the next day go back to killing each other. And, you know, I've heard stories of people growing up in Iraq, and, you know, they'd be neighbors with someone that they knew forever, and then the next day, as soon as a new regime came in, suddenly they couldn't talk to them anymore and they hated them. Like, war itself and conflict is so stupid and so meaningless at the end of the day. Like, look at Australia and Japan now. Like, we're allies, but in the war, and they're allies with America, who dropped nuclear weapons on them. Like, it's just there's a madness and a sickness behind it all. But what do you think motivates? Is it just to divide and conquer, or is it money, or what do you think it is?
Well, it varies from country to country. Some of it's very tribal. You know, we hate your tribe because, you know, this is like, you're the People's Front of Judea and we're the Judean People's Front, you know, if you want to look at the life of Brian. But I remember going into Mostar, and I've got photos, you know, the humpback bridge where they do the Red Bull cliff diving in Mostar. Have you seen that?
Oh, probably have. I would have seen it. I would have seen it.
There's quite a famous humpback bridge in the middle of Mostar, and that was brought down during the war. And I've got a whole bunch of photos where they put power and water across, and we had the Spanish battalion and APC to cover us if things went wrong while we were doing some work there. And I got up on some of the heights above Mostar, and you look down, and there'd be a house that was ridiculously well kept with pretty petunias in the window box and little doily flowers painted on the door and everything you might accept of a little, you know, Swiss mountain getaway. And the house next door was burnt out, completely gutted, everything in it dead, and may or may not be stinking of dead bodies. They were neighbours. They went to each other's festivals. They went to each other's holy days, birthdays. All of a sudden, there'd be a measure of, you know, that person saw, you know, put it down to the most basic. A lot of people don't have the strength of their convictions. You know, what are you willing to die for? What am I willing to die for? What are people watching this willing to die for? I'm willing to die for my moral stance. Okay, you've got to put a bullet in me. It is what it is. I'll go out, and you'll know. You know, I won't be here. I won't see it, but you'll know for the rest of your life that he stood for something and was willing to go. A lot of people aren't. They just aren't. So if you turn around and say, well, why don't you go next door and murder all your neighbours? We'll give you an extra food package, and you'll be good and pat you on the back of the head, and you're a good little tribe X, whatever that is. A lot of people will take that option. It's an easy option. You know, not only am I not going to murder my neighbour, I'm actually going to go after you for even suggesting it. Look at Australia. How many people do you think would sit here and eat from this podcast compared to the population of Australia?
That's right, but that happened during COVID anyway, when neighbour turned on neighbour.
Yeah.
Like like, I mean, that's you know, to Stephen's point. Like, you know, what does it take? I mean, it doesn't take much. Somebody wants to go to the pub, so they'll go and, you know, take an injection that, you know, is untested and, you know, not particularly good for you.
Well,
and then they'll turn you in.
Yeah. I mean, I've always said, if you wanted to know whether you'd protect a Jew in Nazi Germany, just what did you do during COVID? That'll tell you.
Yeah.
You know, simple as that. Yeah. But
that was the first thing. I mean, that was my wife and I talk about that all the time. We certainly know who we can, you know, talk to and trust to an extent. If all shit hits the fan, you know what I mean? Like, it's you know, that especially after COVID, when people are turning their neighbours in, turning their friends in, you know, or not talking to you at all, or whatever it was. And I mean, that's only because of a virus. I mean, that's not to do with actual, like, guns and shooting and killing and all that stuff.
No, absolutely. The path of least resistance. You know, I remember reading a study once, and it could have been Australia. It was basically any Western world, and the study basically said that if the government were to change, you know, if we were invaded and they changed the government, and said, righto, Stephen Adams, go to work, earn your money. You can't talk about this. You still get to pay your mortgage. Your kids still get to go to school. You can play football on Saturday. Keep living the life you live. It's just we run the government now. We're extracting your natural resources, and every attractive woman from the age of 16 to 32 is being sent off to wherever. Most of the people in that country would acquiesce and allow that because that's easy. And okay, you haven't affected me too much. I can still lie my head on the pillow, but I can't talk about X, Y, Z. Only a very small percentage would go, that's not acceptable. I'm not wearing that. Whether that translates as physical action, whether it translates as a silent protest, who knows? But not very many people will actively take the hard road.
Well, we don't have guns anymore, so there's not much that we could do. But I'm gonna put you on the spot and ask you a difficult question now. And hopefully I don't offend you, but it's more just to get your where your head is at the moment. You know, people join the military because, and we call it the defense force. You want to defend Australia. So that doesn't mean you're only going to defend Australia when you can win. You need to defend Australia when you can lose as well. Now you're saying that you want to get out. You're done with Australia. It's not worth defending. It's not worth saving anymore. Is that more because you've lost faith in the leadership of Australia, or you've lost faith in your fellow Australians?
A mix of both. So go back to your first point. You joined the military for to defend Australia. You join the military for a bunch of reasons. Everybody's got their own motivator and their own driver, whether it's I want to do selection and become part of the SAS. I want to be the best helicopter mechanic the world's ever seen. I want to be the greatest pastry chef the Army's ever known. Whatever reason to get you in there. What they do as part of that is to set the team up and a bonding of the team. So whatever your job in the military, you will 100% understand that you can't function in that role without the support of others. So whatever reason you join the Army, in the end, when it comes down to brass tacks, you're there for your crew and your mates. And they know that. You know, this started in the British Army in the 1600s. They're very, very good at it now. They're setting up the psyche the way they want it set up. So whatever you think of the military, or whatever you think you might fight or might defend or might protect or might do or whatever, that's second into you taking care of your mates. I would die before I would let those guys down. That's sort of part one. So you get with the team. The second part you're talking about of me leaving, I think is a mix of everything. People talk about, as an ex-soldier, would you fight for Australia? Well, to fight for Australia means I'm fighting for the system that's in place at the moment. Do you know what I mean? Like, the idea of people going all Red Dawn and all that in Australia in particular is just the most ridiculous thing. Australians are they're bred, they're understand to be acquiescing, to take the path of least resistance, to be quiet, to sit down, to shut up, and they can get on and they can punch away at Facebook and how tough they are, the old armchair commandos, but in reality they're not. Well, turn around and look at who. Are you in the gym, mate? All these guys that, I'd fight for Australia. Okay. When's the last time you ran 5K? Okay. Because if you can't do that, you're not going to be able to do fight. You're not going to be able to fight much. The whole system's structured in such a way that the idea of a guerrilla war in Australia to force a change on government is just, ridiculous, given to affect change at that sort of level, you need a tipping point. You need to approach the whole of government. Australia doesn't have that, doesn't have the people for that, doesn't have anything for that. For me, and I mean, I don't want to anyway. I don't want to push my will. I don't want to harm other people. I don't want to turn up at your house and start punching you because you don't see the way I see, or, I don't want any of that. I just want to be, hey, Shane's that quiet dude down the road that lives on a few acres and grows nice veggies and rides motorbikes, and I think I can take that life and go and lead it with my morality intact and my, the things that are important to me, available to me. The country I go to might have a little bit more problem with crime. I'm not that worried about it. There's ways of dealing with issues like that. To me, Australia has a system of government that's never going to change because there's vested interest in not changing it. We're allowed to have our say to an extent, but you look at the new law coming out where, the Labor government wants to, they turn around, they don't like what I said about the military. Bang, there's the off switch. You know, why would I want to be part of that? Why would anybody would want a part of that? I see now, and you know, as a continent, I'm looking at South America. I just got back again, and I'm going again soon. I think South America is going to see an exodus from the West, if you like, at a level that they saw in the 40s after World War II, the 40s and 50s. For a bunch of reasons, I think it'll be South America, but I can see an exodus from the West. And you look at some of the podcasts and some of the YouTube videos and all that, and it's not a minority view. It's a lot of people are looking to make that move and setting themselves up somewhere else and structuring their society or their little world in a way that they think is reasonable and ethical and, you know, depending on what their ethics are, I suppose, you know, and lead a good, comfortable life. I think if I sat here for the rest of my life, it'd just be through gritted teeth, looking at the stupidity and having no respect and, you know, why would I choose a country where I just detest a lot of the structures and systems that I'm forced to be involved with? I'm lucky I'm in a position, you know, I've worked very, very hard to be in a position where I can make that move. I mean, I get it. People say this is my country. My granddad was born here. Well, so was mine, you know. But my granddad also understood that. I'm sure my granddad would have understood that there comes the time when you pick your battle. And to me personally, I think the battle here is lost, as embarrassing and as sad as it sounds. And I don't decry any Australian at all, or any, you know, anybody who wants to live here and live a wonderful life. Good luck to you. You know, I absolutely pat you on the back, shake your hand, give you $5, buy you a beer, and I'll see you in South America or Asia or, you know, where East Coast of Africa, whatever. I think the system is this close to being broken, and I think it's only downhill from here. I don't know exactly what that downhill looks like, but I don't think that people like you are in enough of a majority to sway that train wreck.
Well, I think we're in a decline to socialism personally.
Yeah, exactly. I've seen socialism, and you know, I've seen it up close, and I've seen what it looks like, and you know, and I've talked to people who had to live under it, and the way they had to deal with things. There's still an opportunity to change now, but that opportunity is outside the shores of Australia, I believe. You know, I don't know. I've had people get really upset, you know, and you're like, well, I don't understand it. It's not affecting you. Basically, all I can think of people get upset about it is I'm not applying skills or ability or anything I have to change the system in Australia. Well, no, I'm not. You know, I've done my help, dealt, all the rest of it. This is, you know, I'm closer to 60 than 50. This is my time to go and lead, enjoy what's left of my life in a moral, decent, reasonable way among people that I respect, with a system that I can understand and move through. And to people that want to force that change and to push against socialism, 100% support you. I get it, but also know that there's going to come a time that exit door closes. You've got to be able to make it out through that door at some stage, or understand if you get caught inside the door what your life will look like. You know, you're ex-military. I've been asked many times, wouldn't you just put a backpack on and go and climb in the hills? Well, yeah, that lasts for 72 hours till the first time I've got to have a sleep. You know, the first time I'm absolutely knackered, I've got to lie down, have a sleep, and the drone finds me and sticks a hellfire through the middle of it, or whatever. You know, the bad guys make me a kick. And it's a dumb idea. It's stupid. It's not like the movies. You know, when we were in those countries, we would be, you know, moving through areas to do jobs and things like that. But we had air superiority. We had the drones. We had the satellite imagery. We had all the rest of it. I respect a lot of those people because they were, you know, if you want to term them the guerrilla or the op four, whatever you want to describe them as, they were still trying to enforce their will in an area where they didn't have that sort of control, that level of ability to move, to deal, to all the rest of it. I'm just saying now that ability for me in particular, I feel is lost. You know, it's hard to describe. It's sort of, to me, it's almost like I've been divorced, you know, and to me it's, you get to the point where you accept the divorce. It is what it is. I feel no great hate, displeasure towards an ex-wife, anything like that. You know, it is what it is. I was 50% of a problem. I understand that, and I accept that, and wish everybody the best. But it's time for me to move on from that divorce. And my divorce at the moment is taking place from, you know, it's Australia and I are getting divorced.
Well,
So
Shane,
Shane,
we can tell from the comments in the chat that people have really enjoyed having you on. Graham says, the ex-Candidates, good job getting Shane on. He clearly has a wealth of international experiences. Kim has also said, Australia needs more men like Shane. So that's a nice comment. And we know that Tony watching, you know, I mean, she recommended you to us, so she loves you as well. But unfortunately, we are getting towards the end. But before we do, I just want to squeeze in one more question. It's about the gun trade and the black market on weapons. What have you seen in relation to that?
In some countries, the sky's the limit. You know, in very, very freely available, easy to get, not a problem, and some quite complex weaponry. I remember being offered a Russian surface-to-air missile. I think it was Estrella for $2,500 US in Bosnia. AKs like Type 56 Chinese AKs, which is kind of weird because you would think they'd be Russian, but they were $100 US. Pretty much anything's available. You know, you talk about the comprehensive landmine treaty and all that sort of stuff. I could go and buy landmines for, you know, $5 and $10, like buying a bag of mixed lollies in some places. You know, for any military force to divest themselves of the ability to use landmines is just stupid. They're a tool that, if used properly, are a fantastic piece of kit for a soldier. Like anything, if they're not used properly, they're bad news. You could buy, I heard of, you know, APCs selling for $50,000, and people were going to cross the confrontation line in a UN APC that they purchased. It's around the world, anything is available, any amount of explosives. You know, there's a lot of the explosives that are made in the West, if you want, or there's a chemical trace in them, so you can tell where they came from and what they are and all the rest of it. You know, we had a choice. We could buy them with or without that chemical trace. You know, it's just there's almost nothing you can't buy. You know, there's governments out there, corrupt governments, that will sell you their active air force if you want, you know, a ground attack aircraft or whatever, crewed by a government pilot, but that had a navigation error and came, you know, 200 k's inside the border and brassed somebody up. That's available if you know where to knock. There's, you know, I was never at the level to see anything, you know, nuclear or anything like that, but I don't doubt that it's available if you know the right people. It just
100%.
During the breakdown of Russia, there were nukes went missing there. They're somewhere. They haven't gone away. They don't rot. There were backpack nukes that went missing in Russia. There's all sorts of things. They are somewhere. You know, you go and add. You know, what about the guy that was assassinated in Kuala Lumpur and they wiped sarin nerve agent across his mouth? That was a state-sponsored North Korean hit, I think. But, you know, that is available somewhere, somehow. And, you know, you look at the guy that was killed in England, the Russian, whatever he was, defector or whatever. They poisoned him with a radioactive substance. They got that all in there. Anything is doable, you know.
That's a good point by Cameron there too. Look at what the US left behind in Afghanistan.
Exactly. Well, look at the night vision technology that they left behind. That alone, you know, they left behind Stingers. So Stingers, after the Afghan war, the operating system, the battery and all that were given a life. It'd degrade and then, you know, eventually be unusable because they left viable Stingers behind with the Mujahideen in Afghanistan. You don't think that some of the adversaries, if you want to call them that, Iran, China, whoever, have the ability to reverse engineer that? You know, I would have to think that if there's a Western airliner gets on the wrong end of a surface-to-air missile, it will be a Stinger that was left behind in Afghanistan that will have been reverse engineered, will have been changed, all of that. You know, like night vision technology is a game changer. That and thermal for the military. We've now, the US government, Biden administration, has given away absolute cutting-edge night vision technology. So that advantage, to an extent, is now lost. You know, it's the stuff they left behind. I mean, with all the Blackhawks, any aircraft, if you went along to a Blackhawk and people talk about disabling, you disable the same part on every aircraft because the chances of them having, you know, a main rotor shaft is almost zero. So if you left the entire Blackhawk okay, but drilled a great big hole through the middle of that on every single one, they're not going to have the spares to fix it. They left operating aircraft behind. They're just, to me, that you know, we were sitting there watching it, and I got a list of what was left behind. MRAPs were seen in Afghanistan. Not, you know, the latest mine-protected vehicles will be reverse engineered. You know, they'll be facing those. It was just the only possible conclusion you could draw. It was done on purpose, and it definitely evened the playing field between us and between the West and any future adversary. It's a train wreck that's going to take a generation to play out.
I'd be scared to know what you know, and have the understanding of like what you know. I'm glad that I'm kind of agnostic and naive to it, because I would be trying to build a bunker somewhere out in the bush. I think I don't know, and I'll be covering it in perspex or something like that to try and heat shield it so they can't see me, and all that kind of stuff. So it's crazy.
Well, the thing is, governments have a level of the ability to observe, and that you can't even fathom. It's so far beyond it. That's, you see a lot of the conflicts the West gets involved with, second and third world armies that don't have that technical support, technical backup. But one day, the West's enemies will have that technical support, and it's a whole different view. You've seen the ad on telly. They have the Russian recruiting advert, the Chinese recruiting advert, the British Royal Marines, which is quite a good one at the moment, recruiting advert. And then they have the American one, and it's a young girl talking about her two mums, and she could be anything she wanted to be. You've got a Russian paratrooper in barracks strapping his boots on line in the snow waiting for a shot. You got the Chinese guy waving goodbye to mum and the kids, putting the pack on and then marching up a mountain. And you've got the woke, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with having two mums.
No, I get it. But you've got some bloke who's turned into a lady wearing a female uniform and going, the army's great.
Well, the thing is, with my commanders, there's got to be a level of respect and understanding. I'm sorry if you dress as a female and, whatever, that level of respect is just reduced. You might be a decent person, but as my commander, if you're making a choice like that in your personal life, will you make an intelligent choice when I need you to make it as my commander? Mm-hmm. What weighting will your perception of yourself, your sexuality or whatever should never enter into a decision or a conversation, but am I confident that it won't? And, I'm not.
That's a fair point.
Yeah, again, we get back to the general talking about the bravest person in his command. That was absolutely disgusting.
Well, sorry, mate. Now it's now time for you to make an intelligent decision. It's up to the final segment of the X-Candidates called Build Your Own Fantasy Government. So on your way out of Australia, you get to choose the next Parliament of Australia. Now you can choose 5 or 6 current politicians, former politicians, maybe generals or some of your commanders in the past, an expert in a certain field, anyone you choose. It could be anyone at all.
Dead or alive?
People, dead or alive, 5 or 6 people to head up the next government of Australia. Who do you choose?
People, it'd be hard. I'd look to multiple institutions. I'd look to, it'd be conservative to start with. There would be a representing member of the churches to take their advice, but not to acquiesce to their will. There would be current politicians. Again, I'd head to the right. I'd want Bob Catter, Pauline Hanson for what I think they bring to the moral argument to understand. I'd want Jacinta Narpin-Price for what she brought to the voice argument. Just amazing. What a woman. Absolutely fantastic. I'd want input from education systems, but again, to an extent, I want to hear what you've got to say, not necessarily what will follow. I wouldn't like to see a party system. The party system isn't working, or at very best, minor parties that have to form a coalition to reach 51% every single time. Who else do I respect as a politician? I can't. stocky guy, conservative guy with a bald head at the moment. Can't think. Sorry.
No, sorry. Not George Christensen.
George Christensen, I'd have in there. Again, all conservative people, and I'd want them to take a lot of input and a lot of advice from the people of Australia, but lean on the conservative side. I want Australia to be, come and live your best life, do what you want. You know, I would want if I was going to stay, but you know, leave your prejudices, leave your drama back where you came from. The whole idea of coming here is you left where you left because you didn't like it. Don't turn this into the same thing. You know, it would be a very conservative government taking a lot of input from a lot of people.
And I believe you've almost paraphrased something that Senator Hanson said in Parliament at some point in time. You know, you've left the country that you were born in. You've come to ours. Now it's time to abide by us. But unfortunately, I think the moral of the story of everything that you've said tonight is that our government and the people in charge and leadership have left what Australia was behind and have now started to change it to something that's not.
And that's where that mental leap needs to take place to people sit here and watch it go downhill, having the understanding there's really not a lot they can do about it. We can talk, we can vote, we can do a whole bunch of stuff. I mean, Western Australia now, they've changed the electoral boundaries. They've got rid of the country-weighted voting system. Western Australia now, nothing happens that the metropolitan area doesn't vote for. And it's as simple as that. So I now, in my own state, effectively have no vote and no voice.
Mm-hmm.
You know, why would I stay for?
And 8% of the state's been handed back over to the native title, hasn't it?
If you look, and you also look at the 30% that's going to be handed back by 2030, with 50% of it under Indigenous governance for the conservation areas and all that. So I'm guessing it's 38%. You know, you look at the fiasco that was the Native Title Act that they had to repeal. If I wanted to plant a fruit tree, I needed to pay for that hole to be inspected. And instead of being able to say, all right, I'll pay for my block, inspect my block, put a caveat on my property title that says it's been inspected, there's nothing here. The legislation said you had to do it every single time. So every time I plant a fruit tree, it gave access to an authorised officer, whoever that was, at all times, free and unfettered access to my property under threat of jail. You know, I've got elderly parents. I don't want anybody wandering around there when I'm not there to help and assist and deal. You know, and this is coming. Labor will get back in as much as it pains me to say that in Western Australia, and that'll become law, you know, pretty soon. And then, you know, where do you go from there? How do you turn around and go, I'm actually a decent, reasonable person. I'm a decent human being. I want to get on. I want to have my own little bit of paradise. I want to wave to whoever lives down the road. And they just turned around and said, no, you can't do that. You're not allowed. We're going to make sure you don't ever get that by this mechanism.
You will earn nothing and be happy.
That's right. Well, Shane, thank you very much for coming on. We really enjoyed this interview. We'll have to have you back at some point to dig into these stories that you've got in a much deeper level. But I think we got a good overall picture of your experience throughout your life and throughout your military career as well. So thank you very much for coming on. I know a lot of people appreciate hearing your story. So all the best, and we'll hope to have you back on soon.
I would love to come back, Stephen. Adam, it's been great. Really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thanks, heaps, Shane.
And for everyone watching, we say it every week. Please share this out. I think there's some really good information, specifically about the UN. You know, that's the talk of the town. Every meeting I go to recently, it's all about, you know, the UN and the WHO Treaty and all this sort of stuff. So if you really want to hear what the UN was all about, share this interview around and hear what Shane had to say. And if you want to support us, you can always do that by jumping onto Buy Me a Coffee. If you want to show your appreciation that way, we would much appreciate it. And hope to see you next week. All the best, and we'll see you next time.
See ya.